Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Calgary Business Podcast powered by Sonic Coaching. I'm your host, Oliver Basner. And I'm pleased to be here today with somebody I've known for quite a while, Bill Black. He's the president and CEO of the Calgary Construction Association. And Bill's also regularly featured in the media, so some of you might have seen him in the past on his various media appearances. He's also been involved in the design and construction sector for over 40 years. So first of all, welcome, Bill.
Thanks for having me.
You've had a lot of roles over that 40 years. Everything from surveying, estimating, leadership, executive positions. So why don't we start right at the beginning? Where'd you grow up? What was your childhood like?
Sure. I grew up in Edinburgh, Scotland. My father was in construction. He was already third generation. So
it was kind of in your blood almost.
Whether I liked it or not, it's not that I was prevented from having choice, but I definitely had a fit for it. And growing up, born in the mid-60s, growing up through the 70s, and then really, quite honestly, Britain was still pretty post-warish in the 60s. It was, and then you get into the 70s and the late 70s, and you had recession, you had unemployment, you had political unrest, you had Northern Ireland going on your doorstep, and we visited there frequently because I had family in Derry, my mum's sister. So, interesting growing up with global events happening around you, and that was just really a fact of life and kept life interesting. And society was, in a post-Beatles era, moving into sort of glam rock. 70s, I kind of was introduced to rock music in the early 70s, and that kind of captured my attention. And out of all the political unrest in the latter part of the 70s came the British punk rock music, which instantly appealed to my natural tendency to have no time for authority in all its forms. That shaped me through the balance of high school. Growing up in Scotland at that time, you were sitting down with a career advisor at 14 because you had to make subject choices depending on what track that you were deciding. Was it college? Yeah, was it college or university or trades or whatever? And you had to, if you wanted university, if you couldn't get the subjects through your O levels and higher, you were wasting your time. So you had to start making early choices. And it was during one such conversation where he asked me, what I really wanted to be, and I wanted to be an architect. I was interested in buildings. But he kind of asked me about, what did I mean by architect? And he says, you're in love with a sort of that stereotypical architect that sort of lives in a loft apartment somewhere and runs around with rolls of drawings and makes skylines come alive and stuff. And he goes, to be honest, that's really not what you're probably going to be cut out, because that's the top 0.002%.
Right.
And so anyway, he talked me back to construction and following my dad's career, which was the last thing I wanted to do. Why do I want to do what my dad does? But I told him my dad was a quantity surveyor, and he knew what that was. He's like, well, wait a minute. He said, quantity surveyors know how to manage the money. And he says, anybody who understands financials of a construction project has an incredible value. You could work for an owner, you could work for a general contractor, you could work for government. He kind of explained to me that it's a highly varied application from that one skill set, which could be a really good flexibility to have. And for some reason, I actually followed an adult's direction for once in my life, and there we have it.
And here you are today.
Yeah, and literally because I made that choice.
Interesting. And let's go back, because you also mentioned the Beatles and rock, and so you still play in a band. Is that your stress release when you're playing?
Yeah, it's my therapy. It's my moment of imagination. You can pretend you're a rock star without having to, give up. I mean, there's a very popular joke out there. What's the difference between an extra large pizza and a musician? An extra large pizza can feed a family of 4. it's a hard life to do. That's why I take my hat off
Yeah.
to those who really devote their career to it. But I've been musical ever since I was little. And so playing in a band for me is about, trying to emulate the various bands and musicians
Right.
that I've been inspired by over the years, find a little bit of your own, and entertain people doing something that you love to do.
Right. And probably a good chance to unplug from the day-to-day of work, right?
Yeah, and make a lot of noise. Hearing damage, that's just a suggestion.
Exactly.
In fact, I just played my first paying gig this past Friday with a group of guys that needed a stand-in guitar player at the last minute because their main guitar player was sick.
There you go. Congratulations. It's not too late yet to
Yeah.
be famous, Bill.
You never know.
Excellent. So let's talk about Calgary Construction Association. You became president and CEO in 2018. You were on the board since 2012. You were named CCA Person of the Year in 2014. Tell our listeners a little bit about Calgary Construction Association, who are the members, purpose. I know things have changed dramatically since you took the helm. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, I was part of the Construction Association as a member from my early days in Calgary, from about 94 onwards. So I knew what it was like to be a customer or a member or
Right.
working for a member organization. And then sitting on the board, I got a little bit of a more detailed idea about what sat behind the CCA and the role of the board and such. But it wasn't really until 2018 that I stepped in as interim president whilst the board made a decision on the long-term direction, that I really got a peek behind the curtain, so to speak, and saw a whole ton of opportunity that actually got me excited. I had no intention of being a part of the association. I had this attitude that if you can't make it in the rail industry, go and run an association. And I was a bit of an adrenaline junkie from being in the industry. And so it was very far from any ideas I thought I wanted to do. And then a couple of light bulbs started to go off, and I realized that a huge opportunity to maybe serve the industry in a slightly different way than it had been traditionally.
How have things changed?
Well, I think, the association model, I believe, is a little jaded, a little old. There's a lot of associations like ours that have been around for 80, 85 years or more.
Right.
And that model can be a bit stale because many of them really sort of built their impact over the 70s and 80s. And our world has changed rapidly. The generations in the workforce are changing what organizations need to provide for employees. Society at large is thinking differently. And I feel that some associations, in a way, have maybe missed that change. Some of them are a bit like the organization that time forgot and maybe don't realize it because they're ticking along just fine. Everything happens year over year, membership's decent. But what I saw was an industry that has been continually eroded in terms of its ability to drive margin, an incredible increase in the risk profiles that businesses have to take on to do work. And who's going to fight for that? It's hard for them to fight for themselves. Many of them are small organizations, and to fight for that, they might have to bite the hand that feeds them, which is hard to do when you're dependent on certain streams of business. And I started to realize that that's the real job of an association, is to go and take the hits on behalf of its membership and its customers and protect them from the repercussions, but still learn their voice and present it to the people that need to hear it.
Right. Now, you've got, that's a big job, because you've got everything from, the national construction associations that are members to, the one-man drywall company, right? How do you balance the needs of everybody? Everybody's got competing agendas and different needs. How do you do that as an association?
I have the advantage of having worked in the industry.
Right.
In a number of different capacities for different sizes of organizations. I've been in the trade contractor side, I've been in the consultant side, I've worked for a manufacturer, during which I worked directly with senior owners and developers, those who are further up the food chain. And so it gave me a really broad perspective in terms of role, the stake different entities have in the overall ecosystem, as well as the different ways in which large companies and medium and small companies operate and such. And so really you boil it down to a simple fact: construction is a people industry. Some people have more people than others.
True.
But it's still a people industry. And if you can understand what motivates and drives the business engine of each one, you can listen, you can learn, you can adapt based on the circumstances of each one and be relevant to them all.
Yeah, makes sense. Let's talk about those people, because we know there's a shortage in the industry, right? Like what can you as an association do, but what can we do to make sure there are enough people moving forward, right? That we've got enough workers to, frame the buildings and build the buildings, and the electricians. I mean, there's so much that goes into construction. How do we make sure we've got the people?
Well, I think, first and foremost, we need to be willing to accept that we're long past the day of quick solutions for workforce. That day probably passed mid-90s. Mm-hmm. We've been too busy. We've been too busy building, or as an industry, because we are a barometer of the economy, we've been too busy riding the peaks and troughs of a very volatile economy in this particular part of the world. We were too busy screaming white knuckles at the height of the boom to then heading over the cliff and trying to downsize to survive, and then trying to hibernate our way through the downturn and get ready for the upswing, to maybe realize what was happening above the tree line, which was, for the last 40 years, society has progressively been told and has bought into the concept that construction is a second or a third rate career, because if you need and want to be anybody, you need to have a 4-year degree of some kind.
Right.
Academia has bought into that, has marketed to that. And so in all our busyness, we didn't realize that society's stereotyping passed us by.
So how do we fix it?
We have to accept the fact that we took our eye off that ball and be willing to buckle down. This is a 20-year solution. We need to be willing to invest in, and there's no such thing as a bad idea when it has been allowed to degrade for so long. You need to be willing to get in front of society at large and show society what those who, unlike me, if you grow up in a construction family, you don't need to be told this, but if you've grown up in a factory that has no construction, no parents or relatives or anybody in the industry, you don't realize that when you drive past the BMO Centre after its opening and you finally look at it, that you look at it and you may or may not like the design, you may have comments on it as a layperson, but you don't realize there's 1,500 men and women who drive up and down McLeod Trail past that every week or two with maybe their kids in the car. And they're proud because they worked on that project. Mm-hmm. They put that project together from a piece of dirt in the ground, from demolishing the existing buildings to finishing it. And they have pride. They've delivered something that changes the way life even functions in Calgary. And that's what our industry does. It's never spoken of that way.
It's true. Absolutely. Well, and I do wonder, in the world of AI, with everybody talking about how AI is now coming after some of the white collar jobs, right? Is that an opportunity, right, for construction to now say, hey, there's some great jobs in this industry?
Well, there's no doubt that the growing narrative that AI, is probably a bigger threat to administrative type roles and data management roles and such. That narrative is likely shedding a more positive light on construction, in that whilst there's many elements of construction that can be positively impacted by AI, all it does is enhance the ability for people to build.
Right.
Construction has become a much more administratively burdensome process over the last 20 years than it ever was. A tremendous amount of work and effort is spent on that paperwork burden. And it's not that the paperwork isn't relevant or isn't needed. it's burdensome.
It's true.
It means you've got more overhead that's not putting bricks on top of bricks or steel together, but is doing all the paperwork side of the business. So AI could have a massive impact on that. Data management. There's a lot of data that flows through a project that informs the design, that informs the bids, informs the design and function and operation of the building that AI could begin to manage. But at the end of the day, the person that's up a scaffold or up a ladder,
Right.
trying to deal with a physical challenge that nobody knew was there until they got there, and has to get that solution in place immediately and quickly, and it maybe involves 6 other trades and their scopes of work, that is a completely human situation that could not be managed to the degree that it needs to be through some kind of robotic or AI based. There's a great saying I heard the other week there that AI will not take an electrician's job, but whilst he or she is up a ladder doing their install, AI could be taking the order for their next project automatically.
Yeah.
And that's the relationship. I think it will empower builders and constructors in ways that they've needed for a long time.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you know that I have my, the Sonic coaching business, and, I've done quite a bit of work in construction, with senior leaders. And, there's estimating, there's so much clerical in construction. People don't even realize to get that BMO center up. I mean, there was, you had to put in a bid, and you had to have estimators on that, and you have to have people crunching numbers, and then you have to, during the project construction, you have to have people monitoring to make sure you're still, not losing money on the project, right? So I completely agree. I mean, that's where AI can be helpful, right, to reduce some of that clerical and administrative nightmare, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Yeah, AI and technology in general.
Yeah.
There's a lot of technologies out there that can scan and monitor progress and report it.
And predict profitability.
Absolutely, and can even measure the people that are on site, how long they're on site for, and what they're doing. There's so many different ways that can be implemented, and it's positive. The challenge is, though, as I mentioned earlier, in an industry whose margins have been literally beaten up to next to zero, the ability to invest in R&D is absent from most organizations.
Right.
Because the trouble with R&D, it's not just the cost of the research and development work that you're doing, it's the fact that it's probably non-billable hours that are doing the R&D. And if you have thin margins and you've had to turn yourself into a very no-frills organization, a bit like an airline, to survive, non-billable activity is hard to fund in a very tight margin business.
True enough. So, we're talking about R&D. You launched a new program, and I don't know if there was any R&D or how it came about, but let's talk about it, because I think it's important that we talk about this program. You launched your Tailgate Toolbox, right, around the whole mental health initiative. Talk about that. Tell us about that. What's that all about? How did that come about?
Yeah, it probably first hit my radar just before COVID. I was speaking to somebody who'd been at a conference in the US, and during that conference there had been a individual talking about mental health within the construction industry, and that individual had shared the frightening statistic that a male in the construction industry in North America is 5 times more likely to die by suicide than in any other industry.
Any other industry?
In any other industries.
Wow.
And that's kind of one of these stats that you first of all maybe cynically think is just a shock statistic designed to have an impact, and then you start digging into it, and you only have to Google once and the stats just keep scrolling. Mental health and suicide amongst males, because 90% of males of people that die by suicide in the industry are male.
Right.
And then you start wondering why, and you start realizing that it's a male-dominated industry, and males have a challenge around mental health and wellness. somehow we were told, we don't remember it, but somehow we learned that you just have to grit your teeth and go through it. That as a male, you have to act invincibly and just close your eyes for a moment and then steel your jaw and get up and push through. And
Yep.
you suppress stuff. And, you know, as a male, because that's supposedly what makes you strong, until you're not. But then there's other...
Or until you break.
Until you break. That's, yeah, exactly. You can't, you know, bury these things. But then you realize it's a male-dominated industry. It's a high-stress industry. There's
Right.
a deadline-driven dynamics to the work. There are layoff cycles where you can find yourself out of work, long or short term. That creates financial stress because how do you provide for your family? Mm-hmm. There's the potential for injuries where you might have been prescribed painkillers that can lead to addiction. Mm-hmm. There are sometimes second or third generation construction people who come from a family history where there's been mental health issues, you know, in their family. There's so many factors, and it's a highly people-oriented business. So you've got high concentrations of people. And if you look at other industries, such as the hotel and restaurant business, you see serious mental health issues exist in some of these heavy, hands-on, high-stress environments and such. And so started to dig into that and realize that it's a really difficult subject. How do you start having a conversation that will reverse that?
And make it comfortable.
Make it comfortable and make it effective, because you look at yourself in the mirror and say, well, if somebody comes on and starts lecturing me about my mental health, I'm just going to politely nod and then move on, because you don't know me, you don't tell me how to, you know,
Yeah.
you have that natural resistance. And then I discovered one of our partner associations in Vancouver Island, the Vancouver Island Construction Association, had pioneered a program called Tailgate Toolkit on behalf of Island Health, who had seen stats around drug-related deaths that tied back to construction or transportation workers.
Right.
56% of drug-related deaths or thereabouts were people who had construction or transportation on their T4. And so they pioneered this program. It was modeled on the old toolbox talk that we used to have in the industry, where every morning a crew would start around the toolbox, around the back of a truck, and have a safety conversation about the site and about anything they'd seen or a best practice, and just to
Right.
create the awareness on the job site. A short half hour or so, a bit of a safety awareness. And so they modeled it around drug addiction and addiction awareness and trying to destigmatize mental health and addiction. And so we're part of 60 different associations across Canada. And one of the beauties of our network is we don't compete, because we only serve members in our local area. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to steal a member from Toronto.
No.
Maybe if they open a Calgary office, I will, but then they will retain membership in both locations. So it means we share a lot. We can share best practices and ideas. And long story short, the city of Calgary was very interested when I shared the stats. And the city of Calgary said, you know, we're the largest buyer of construction services in the Calgary economic region, and we have a community mental health fund. We could probably find the funding for that program. Vancouver Island Construction Association agreed to let us take their program and roll it out in the Calgary market. And we're now in our second year. The city of Calgary has funded both years.
And is it working?
It is. To our ultimate surprise, within 3 weeks of starting, we had 200 site requests.
Wow.
For talks. We thought we'd have to drag the conversation kicking and screaming into the open.
Yeah.
And instead, we were swamped.
So
with
the
requests.
need was there.
The awareness, the need, but everybody they didn't know how to start. And so what Tailgate Toolkit is it's a way to start doing business with the problem that gets you past the impasse that most people felt. And so to date, there's been nearly 3,000 people have been through a talk on various sites, in some businesses, in some town halls. It's open to members and non-members, because this is funded by the city. Anyone in the construction industry, residential, commercial, or otherwise. And
Wow.
we've also partnered with Headversity. Anybody who has had or has a talk will get free access to Headversity and the app that brings them mental health and awareness education, as well as a panic button if somebody is truly distressed. And then we will shortly be starting to roll out leadership training for business leaders and site superintendents, those who manage teams, to help them develop a higher level of understanding and awareness about mental health and drug addiction, so they can more readily see the signs, maybe react earlier, and utilize some of these resources to help people that have reached a point where they maybe are starting to give up
Right.
on themselves.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Headversity. It's a great app, wonderful app, and I mean, excellent work you're doing with that. So hopefully that catches on, and it'd be nice to see this all across Canada and North America at some point.
Yes, I mean, ultimately we would like to see it expand provincially, and Vancouver Island Construction Association, it's their program. Our
Yeah.
commitment is to protect the integrity of it,
Of the program.
and make sure that it doesn't go off and create some weird hybrid.
Right.
It's also about taking all our learning and combining it with theirs and using it to inform what might happen next. But I mean, some of the stories that we've encountered already, there was a gentleman with a firm who had a couple of conversations with our manager who goes out and delivers these programs. I
Right.
think this is something we need. I just don't know how to introduce it, and I'm not sure if I could get buy-in. And that was the kind of passing conversation. 2 weeks later, he called. We just had a young 23-year-old commit suicide last
Wow.
night. I guess,
Not the kind of call you want.
no,
right?
I guess I missed the boat. What can I do? How can we do something? It's literally that serious. It's a pretty tough conversation to have. You suddenly realize this isn't just checking a box.
Right.
This is actually addressing the problem and being willing to try and engage in the heavy lifting part of solutions.
And saving lives.
Yeah, ultimately at the end of the day.
Yeah.
We care as an industry incredibly well at a very detailed level about physical safety. Millions and millions of hours and dollars
Yes.
are spent every year across this entire industry.
In every organization.
Managing safety on site, managing safety in factories, managing safety on the roads, when trucks and logistics are moving around. We care, and we do incredible work and have invested billions of dollars in physical safety. Mental safety is no different, and it's just as much of a killer as physical safety, and it's really beginning to become as close a part to physical safety as wearing a hard hat is.
Right.
It's part of that. Physical safety is making sure they go home safe at the end of the day. Mental safety is making sure they come back the next day.
They come back. Yeah, absolutely. Nicely put. No, thanks for sharing that, Bill. Believe it or not, we're getting close to the end of the time, but I have a couple of questions I ask all my guests. So, let me throw these out at you. So, you've been in this industry a long time, Bill, and you've seen a lot, you've done a lot, you've experienced a lot. What do you wish someone would have told you at the start of your journey? That person right now that's at the start of their journey that's listening. What do you wish somebody would have told you?
Grow faster.
What does that mean?
Be willing to look for mentors that take you out your comfort level and pull you somewhere you didn't think you could get. Don't look at all your bosses as the enemy. Don't look at them all as people that make you feel like you're not doing a very good job, and realize they're trying to teach you how to do a better one. Don't look at your salary right out of high school as a better way to fund your social life so you can go out and do even more. It's the front end loading of your career, because especially in the construction career, there are so many different variables that you can take along the way, and that's probably something else I wish somebody had tried to help me realize. I can now look back, and there's not a single road I turned down or door I walked through in the last 44 years in June that could ever have been part of a plan. They all happened to me, and somehow I was either pushed through them or I walked through them and ended up with an incredibly well-rounded, variety of experiences. But I probably wasted 10 years and then nearly killed myself trying to catch up. So the value of commitment early, when your brain is fresh, when you're a blank sheet of paper, yes, you need to have fun and you need to have a life, but earlier commitment, if somebody could have painted that picture for me, I don't know if I'd be any better off, but I might have, not wasted time the way I did.
You might have been better prepared.
I might have been better prepared, and but the thing is, who can tell? Sometimes better prepared means you think you know it all, so you don't walk through that door.
Yeah.
Because I've got it all together. Half the time I walked through the door was because I'd burned the bridge behind me, so I had no choice. At least a couple of times. Anyway.
Yeah, I've done that in my career. That's the school of hard knocks. That's how we learn those ones, Bill. Yeah. No, thanks for that. That's some sage advice. And then, my philosophy is personal development, professional development, they're really one and the same, right? You're going to personally develop, you're going to professionally develop. What's been one of your favorite self-development tools or books that you've read that you can recommend?
I wish I discovered it again when I was younger, because I think it would have made me realize I had more ability than I gave myself credit for, and that's StrengthsFinder. When I was first introduced to StrengthsFinder, and the idea that you have natural strengths that you are naturally good at because of the way you're wired, that you really don't have to be taught.
Right.
And the problem with school, the problem with corporate training is, the mistake everybody makes is they try and get taught to do things better that they suck at, rather than identify what they're naturally brilliant at.
Yeah.
And then position their role to empower their strengths. Instead, they sit through classes or whatever it might be, seminars or lunch and learns, trying to pretend they're interested in something that has absolutely no value to them. I didn't get introduced to StrengthsFinder until I was over 40. I wish I'd learned it when I was 25.
Right.
Because it gave me a confidence that I could do stuff that I didn't give myself credit for. I thought there were smarter people than me. I didn't realize that I had some inherent strengths that I'd pushed down because I was being told I needed to be something I wasn't.
Right.
And I had subscribed to that education model rather than that self-awareness model. I think StrengthsFinders is a brilliant way to help people learn where their confidence lies. It can take unconfident people and make them confident, at least in their strengths.
Right.
And help them to start to look for opportunities for their strengths rather than struggle to try and be somebody that they're maybe never going to be.
Right.
And accept that their lack of success in being better at what they're not good at isn't somebody else's fault. It's just they're not fit. And so StrengthsFinder was a big eye-opener for me, because it also taught me that the reason some people frustrate the hell out of me is because they're good at what I'm bad at.
Right.
And it's that idea that you get frustrated by people that do something better than you do, and they don't fit your way of thinking. And instead of realizing that, wait a minute, if I combine with that individual and these three other individuals,
right,
all of a sudden we've got it all covered, and as a team, we're invincible.
True enough.
Just one simple top 5 strengths experience back when I was about 40, 45 years old totally turned my life literally in an instant into a whole different perception of what I needed to focus on and how I could maybe push harder in areas I was good at because I had that strength.
Well, you're naturally gifted, right? So that's a strength you've got.
Yeah,
right?
And reading a few other books and just lifting little ideas out of them. Not the whole book. I'm never going to give you the Reader's Digest of every book I've read, but I'll probably tell you the one thing, which was on 3 pages,
yep,
that just stood out, and I still hold on to it. don't read the book for the whole understanding. Read the book for the bit that gives you the biggest aha, and then go and adopt it.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Strengths Finders, and there's nothing like figuring out your top 5, which if people are listening, I mean, if they just look it up, it's by Gallup, right? They can literally order it online. The other thing I found is it's interesting if you do the full assessment, figuring out what your weakest ones are.
Oh, I've done the full one too.
Yeah, and I've done it as well, and realizing that, why am I trying to, be strong in one of my weakest areas? Like, I'll just go find somebody or hire somebody or work with somebody that can round me out, where they've got strengths, where I've got weaknesses. So that's a great share.
Well, over the last 15 or 16 years, I've done StrengthsFinder 4 times.
Has it changed much?
Yep. The top 15 has changed. They all still sit within the top 15, but the top 5 has altered as I've had more roles that have required me to run a team and lead people and work with broader teams. I finally developed some empathy. Go figure. And that changed.
Right.
But the top 15 remains the same. The inventory shifts. What is funny, and you know me, so this will be no surprise to you, is that number 33 and number 34 have never changed. My 34th, my weakest strength is discipline. And
that shocks me, Bill. Not at all.
And my second weakest is consistency. I think that's pretty consistent.
That's pretty consistent, yes. That they're consistently the bottom 2.
Like, if you put me on Myers-Briggs and DISC and all these ones, I mean, basically I'm unemployable. But if you put me on StrengthsFinder, you're like, that's a bunch of weird stuff that, maybe we could use.
Hopefully your board's not listening about the other part. Well, awesome, Bill. We're out of time, but you've shared some nuggets, some wisdom. So I appreciate you spending time chatting with me. For our listeners, you've been listening to the Calgary Business Podcast, powered by Sonic Coaching. Watch for our next episode in 2 weeks. And again, we've been chatting with Bill Black, President and CEO of the Calgary Construction Association here in Calgary. Thanks, Bill, for joining us.
You're more than welcome. It was a pleasure.